Thumbelina, the story of the adventures of a girl no larger than a person's thumb. There was once a woman who wished very much to have a little child. She went to the fairy and said, "I should so very much like to have a little child. Can you help me?" "Oh, that can be easily managed," said the fairy. "Here is a barley corn. It is not exactly the same sort which grows in the farmer's fields and which we give to our chickens to eat. Put it in a flower pot and see what will happen." "Thank you," said the woman, and she gave the fairy 12 shillings, which was the price of the barley corn. Then she went home and planted it, and there grew up a large, handsome flower, somewhat like a tulip in appearance, but with its leaves tightly closed, as if it were still a bud. "It is a beautiful flower," said the woman, and she kissed the red and golden-colored petals. And as she did so, the flower opened, and she could see it was a real tulip. But within the flower, upon the green velvet, sat a very delicate and graceful little maiden. She was scarcely half as long as a thumb, and they gave her the name of Little Thumb, or Thumbelina, because she was so small. A walnut shell, elegantly polished, served her for a cradle. Her bed was formed of blue violet leaves, with a rose leaf for a counterpane. Here she slept at night, but during the day she amused herself on a table where the peasant wife had placed a plate full of water. Round this plate were flowers with their stems in the water. Upon it floated a large tulip leaf, which served the little one for a boat. Here she sat and rowed herself from side to side, with 2 oars made of white horsehair. It was a very pretty sight. Thumbelina could also sing so softly and sweetly that nothing like her singing had ever been heard before. One night, while she lay in her pretty bed, a large, ugly, wet toad crept through a broken pane of glass in the window and leapt right upon the table where she lay sleeping under her rose leaf quilt. "What a pretty little wife this would make for my son," said the toad, and she took up the walnut shell in which Thumbelina lay asleep and jumped through the window with it into the garden. In the swampy margin of a broad stream in the garden lived a toad with her son. He was uglier even than his mother, and when he saw the pretty little maiden in her elegant bed, he could only cry, "Croak, croak, croak." "Don't speak so loud, or she will awake," said the toad. "And then she might run away, for she is as light as a swan's down. We will place her on one of the water lily leaves out in the stream. It will be like an island to her, so she is light and small, and then she cannot escape. While she is there, we will make haste and prepare the stateroom under the marsh, in which you are to live when you are married." Far out in the stream grew a number of water lilies with broad green leaves which seemed to float on top of the water. The largest of these leaves appeared further off than the rest. The old toad swam out to it with the walnut shell, in which Thumbelina still lay asleep. The tiny creature woke very early in the morning and began to cry bitterly when she found where she was, for she could see nothing but water on every side of the large green leaf, and no way of reaching the land. Meanwhile, the old toad was very busy under the marsh, making her room with rushes and yellow wildflowers to make it look pretty for her new daughter-in-law. Then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf on which she had placed poor Thumbelina. She wanted to bring the pretty bed that she might put in the bridal chamber to be ready for her. The old toad bowed low to her in the water and said, "Here is my son. He will be your husband, and you will live happily together in the marsh by the stream." Croak, 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 was all her son could say for himself. So the toad took up the elegant little bed and swam away with it, leaving Thumbelina all alone on the green leaf, where she sat and cried. She could not bear to think of living with the old toad and having her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes who swam about in the water beneath had seen the toad and heard what she said. So now they lifted their heads above the water to look at the little girl. As soon as they caught sight of her and they saw she was very pretty, it upset them to think that she must go to live with the ugly toads. No, it must never be. So all the fishes gathered together in the water, round the green stalk which held the leaf on which the little girl stood. They chewed and they bit it all the way to the root with their teeth. Then the leaf floated down the stream, carrying Thumbelina far away out of reach of the land. Thumbelina sailed past many towns, and the little birds in the bushes saw her and sang, "What a lovely little creature!" So they swam away with her further and further until she brought herself to the land. A graceful little white butterfly constantly fluttered around her and helped her to alight onto the leaf. The little maiden pleased that she was glad, for now the toad could not possibly reach her, and the country, though she sailed, was beautiful, and the sun shone upon the water until it glittered like gold. She still felt that she had to be beside the butterfly. The end of the ribbon to the leaf, which now glided as much faster than before, taking Thumbelina with it as she stood. Presently a large cockroach flew by. The moment he caught sight of her, he seized her round her delicate waist with his claws and flew with her into the tree. The green leaf floated away onto the river, and the butterfly flew with it, for he was fastened to it and could not get away. Oh, how frightened Thumbelina felt when the cockroach flew with her to the tree. But especially was she sorry for the beautiful white butterfly which she had fastened to the leaf. For he could not free himself, he would die of hunger. But the cockroach, he did not care. This was of no matter to him. He seated himself by her side on a large green leaf, gave her some honey from the flowers to eat, and told her she was very pretty, not the least like a cockroach. After a time, all the cockroaches who lived in the trees came to pay Thumbelina a visit. They stared at her, and then the young lady cockroaches turned up, they feeling, and said, she has only 2 legs. How ugly that looks." "She has no feelers," said another. "Her waist is quite slim. Puh, she is like a human being." "Oh, she is ugly," said all the lady cockroaches. The cockroach who had run away with her believed all the others when they said she was ugly. He would have nothing more to say to her, and told her she might go where she liked. Then he flew down with her from the tree and placed her on a daisy, and she wept at the thought that she was so ugly that even the cockroaches would have nothing to say to her. After a while, she was really the loveliest creature that could ever imagine, and as tender and as delicate and as beautiful as a rose. During the whole summer, poor little Thumbelina lived quite alone in the wild forest. She made herself a bed with blades of grass, and she hung a broad leaf to protect her from the rain. She sucked the honey from the flowers for food and drank the dew from the leaves every morning. So passed away the summer and the autumn. Then came the winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung to her so sweetly had flown away, and the trees and the flowers had all withered away. The large shamrock under the shelter of which she had lived was now rolled together and shriveled up. Nothing remained but a yellow stalk. She felt dreadfully cold, for her clothes were torn. She was herself so frail and delicate. She was nearly frozen to death. It began to snow, and the snowflakes, they fell upon her like whole shovels falling upon us. But she was only an inch high. She wrapped herself in a dry leaf, but it cracked in the middle and could not keep her warm. She shivered with the cold. Near the wood in which she had been living was a large cornfield, but the corn had been cut a long time before. Nothing remained but the bare, dry stubble standing up in the frozen ground. It was like struggling through a large wood or forest. Oh, how she shivered with the cold. She came at last to the door of a field mouse, who had a little den under the corn stubble. The field mouse had a warm and comfortable room full of corn, a kitchen, and a beautiful dining room. Poor Thumbelina stood before the door, just like a little beggar girl, and asked for a small piece of barley corn, for she had been without any food for 2 days. "You poor little creature," said the field mouse, for she was very good. "Come into my warm room and dine with me." She was pleased with Thumbelina, so she said, "You are quite welcome to stay with me all the winter, if you like. But you must keep my rooms clean and neat, and tell me stories, for I should like to hear very much." And Thumbelina did all that the field mouse asked her, and found herself very comfortable. "We shall have a visitor soon," said the mouse one day. "My neighbour pays me a visit once a week. He is better off than I am. He has large rooms and wears a beautiful black velvet coat. If you could only have him for a husband, you would be well provided for indeed. But he is blind, so you must tell him of some of your prettiest stories." Thumbelina did not feel at all interested about this neighbour, for he was a mole. However, he came and paid his visit, dressed in his black velvet coat. "He is very rich and learned, and his house is 20 times larger than mine," said the field mouse. He was rich and educated, no doubt, but he always spoke of the sun and the pretty flowers, because he had never seen them. Thumbelina was asked to sing to him, "Ladybird, ladybird, fly away," and many of the other pretty songs. And the mole fell in love with her because she was so sweet. But he said nothing yet, because he was very cautious. A short time before, the mole had dug a long passage under the earth, which led from the dwelling of the field mouse to his own, and here she had permission to walk with Thumbelina whenever she liked. But he warned them not to be alarmed at the sight of a dead bird which lay in the passage. It was a perfect bird with a beak and feathers, and could not have been dead long. It was just lying there when the mole made his passage. The mole took in his mouth a piece of wood, which glistened like fire in the dark. Then he went forward to light them along the long dark passage. When they came to a spot where the dead bird lay, the mole pushed his nose through the ceiling so that the earth gave way and the daylight shone in the passage. In the middle of the floor lay a swallow, his beautiful wings pulling close to his sides, his feet and head down under his feathers. The poor bird had eventually died of the cold. It made little Thumbelina very sad. She did so love the little birds. All the summer they had sung and twittered for her so beautifully. But the mole pushed it aside with his legs and said, "He will sing no more now. How miserable it must be to be born a little bird. I am thankful that none of my children will ever be birds." "Yes, you may say that. A clever man," explained the field mouse. "What is the use when winter comes? He must either starve or be frozen to death. Still, birds are very high-bred." Thumbelina said nothing, but when the two others had turned their backs upon the bird, she stooped down and stroked the soft feathers which covered his head. She closed the eyelids. "Perhaps this was one who sang to me so sweetly in the summer," she said, "and how much pleasure it gave me." The mole now stopped up the hole which the daylight shone, and then accompanied the ladies home. But during the night, Thumbelina could not sleep, so she got out of bed and she wove a large, beautiful carpet of hay. She carried it to the dead bird and spread it over him. She found in the field mouse's room it was as soft as wool, and she spread some of it on each side of the bird, so that he might lie warmly in the cold earth. "Farewell, pretty little bird," she said. "Thank you for your delightful singing during the summer, when all the trees were green and the warm sun shone upon us." Then she laid her head on the bird's breast. But she was alarmed, for it seemed as if something inside the bird went thump, thump. It was the bird's heart. He was not really dead, only numb with the cold, and the warmth had restored him to life. In autumn, all the swallows fly away to warm countries. But if one happens to linger, the cold seizes it, and it becomes chilled and falls down as if dead. It remains where it fell, and the snow covers it. Thumbelina trembled very much. She was frightened, for the bird was large, a great deal larger than herself. She was only an inch high. But she took courage, laid the wool more thickly over the poor swallow, and then took a leaf, which she had used for her own, and laid it over his head. The next night she stole out to see him again. He was alive but very weak. He could only open his eyes for a moment to look at Thumbelina, who stood by holding a piece of decaying wood in her hand, for she had no other lantern. "Thank you, pretty girl," said the bird. "I've been so warm. I should regain my strength and be able to fly when the sun shines." "Oh," she said, "it was cold outside now. The snow freezes. Stay in your bed. I will take care of you." She brought the bird some water in a flower leaf, and after he had drunk, he told her that he had a wound in one of his wings. He could not fly as fast as the others, who were soon far away on their journey to a warm country. At last he had fallen to the earth and could remember nothing more. until she found him. All winter, the bird remained underground, and Thumbelina nursed him with care and love. She did not tell anyone, not the mole or the field mouse, anything about it, because they did not like the birds. Very soon spring came, and the sun warmed the earth. Then the bird said farewell to Thumbelina, and she opened the hole which the mole had made. The sun shone in, and the bird managed to climb out and was able to fly away. "Farewell, you pretty girl," said the bird, and he flew out into the sunshine. Thumbelina looked after him, and tears rose in her eyes. She was very fond of the poor swallow. "Tweet, tweet," sang the bird as he flew out of the green woods, and Thumbelina felt very sad. She was not allowed to go out of the warm sunshine. The corn which had been sown in the field over the house of the field had grown up high into the air, and now was thick wood. Thumbelina was only an inch in height. "You're going to be married, little one," said the field mouse. "My neighbor has asked for you. What good fortune for a poor child like you. Now we must prepare your wedding clothes. They must be woolen and linen. Nothing must make you better to be a wife for the mole." Thumbelina had to turn the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders who were to weave day and night. Every evening the mole visited her and was asking her many times about the summer. Then he would keep his wedding day with Thumbelina. But now the heat of the sun was so great that it burned the earth and made it hard like stone. As soon as the summer was over, the wedding should take place. But Thumbelina was not at all pleased, for she did not like the tiresome mole. Every morning when the sun rose and every evening when it went down, she would creep out of the door, and as the wind blew, so she could see the blue sky. She thought how beautiful and bright it seemed out there, and wished so much to see her dear friend, the bird, again. But he never returned, for by this time he had flown far away into the lovely green forest. When autumn arrived, Thumbelina had her outfit quite ready, and the field mouse said to her, "In 4 weeks the wedding must take place." Then she cried and said she could not marry the mole. "Nonsense," said the field mouse. "Now don't be stubborn, or I shall bite you with my white teeth. He is a very handsome mole, and you can wear the most beautiful velvets and furs. His kitchen and his cellars are quite full. You will never be hungry again." So the wedding day was fixed, and Mole was going to take her away to live with him deep under the earth, and she would never again see the warm sun because he did not like it. The poor child was very unhappy at the thought of saying farewell to the beautiful sun, and as the field mouse had given her permission to stand at the door, she went to look at it once more. "Farewell, bright sun," she cried, with her arms stretched out towards it. Then she walked a short distance from the house, and only the dry stubble remained in the fields. "Farewell, farewell," she repeated, her arms out around a little red flower that grew just by her side. The bird came to me and saw him again. "Tweet, tweet," sounded over her head. Suddenly she looked up, and there was the bird himself flying close by. As soon as he saw Thumbelina, he was delighted. He told him that she didn't want to marry the ugly mole and live underneath the earth. No matter what, she would never see the sun again. And then she cried. "Cold winter is coming," said the bird, "and I'm going to fly away into warmer countries. Will you go with me? You can sit on my back and fasten yourself onto my sash. Then we can fly away from the ugly mole and his gloomy rooms, far away over the mountains, into warmer countries, where the sun shines more brightly than here, where it's always summer and the flowers bloom in greater beauty. Fly now with me, dear little one, and save your life. I think about when you saved my life when I lay frozen." "Yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina, and she sat herself on the bird's back, with her feet on his wings, and one hand on his neck and one on his feathers. The bird rose in the air and flew over the forest and over the sea, high above the highest mountains, covered with snow. Thumbelina would have been frozen in the cold air, but she kept under the bird's warm feathers, keeping her little head covered, so that she might admire the beautiful lands as she flew past. Now they reached the warm countries where the sun shines brightly and the sky seemed so much bluer. Here the green hedges grew and grew. Everywhere they could see purple and green and white grapes, lemons and oranges hung from the trees in the fields, and the air was fragrant with oranges and blossoms. Beautiful children ran along the country lanes, playing with large butterflies, and as the bird flew further and further, every place appeared more and more beautiful. At last they came to a blue lake, and by the side of it were lots of trees of the deepest green. There stood a palace of dazzling white marble built into the old times. Vines clustered round its pillars, and at the very top there were many birds' nests, and one of these was the home of the bird who carried Thumbelina. "This is my house," said the swallow, "but it would not do for you to live there. You would not be comfortable. You must choose for yourself somewhere that is comfortable with flowers and where you will make yourself happy." "Thank you," she said. "That will be delightful." And she clapped her little hands with joy. A large marble pillar lay on the ground, which was broken into 3 pieces. Between these pieces grew the most beautiful large white flower. So the bird flew down with Thumbelina and placed her on one of its leaves. But now she was to see in the middle of the flower a tiny little man, as white and transparent as if he had been made of crystal. He had a gold crown on his head and delicate wings on his shoulders, and was not much larger than she herself. He was an angel of the flower. For a tiny man and a tiny woman, every flower seems to be a kingdom for a king. "Oh, how beautiful he is," whispered Thumbelina to the bird. The little prince was quite frightened at the bird, who was like a giant compared to such a delicate creature as himself. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was delighted and thought she was the prettiest girl he had ever seen. He took the gold crown from his head and placed it on hers. He asked her name and if she would like to be his wife and queen. This certainly was a very different sort of husband from the son of the toad or the black mole. So she said, yes to the handsome prince. Then all the flowers opened up, and out of them came a little lady or a tiny lord, all so pretty. It was quite a pleasure to look at them. Each of them brought Thumbelina a present. But the best gift was a pair of beautiful wings, which had belonged to a large white fly. They fastened them to Thumbelina's shoulders so that she might fly from flower to flower. There was much rejoicing, and the little bird who sat above them in his nest was asked to sing a wedding song, which he did, as well as he could. But in his heart he felt sad, for he was very fond of Thumbelina, and would have liked for her to be his wife. "You must not call me Thumbelina any more. It's an ugly name, and you are so very beautiful. We will call you Maya." "Farewell," said the bird with a heavy heart, as he left the warm countries to fly back into Denmark. There he had a nest over the window of a house in which the writer of fairy tales sat while he was writing his story about Thumbelina. The end.